For 30 years, Johnny Carson wasn't just the host of The Tonight Show. He was the most powerful man in Hollywood, and almost nobody in the entertainment industry dared to forget it. A single appearance on his stage could turn an unknown comedian into a household name overnight. A thumbs up from Carson meant sold-out concert tours, record deals, and movie offers. But what Carson gave, Carson could also take away. And when he decided you were done, you were done. No appeals. No second chances. No explanation required. The stories of who got banned from The Tonight Show are legendary in Hollywood circles. But few bans were as painful, as personal, or as professionally devastating as the one involving Joan Rivers, the woman who had once been closer to Carson than almost anyone else in the business. She wasn't just a guest. She was his protégé. Some say she was his closest female confidant. And in 1986, she became the one person he could never forgive. This is the story of what really happened, the loyalty, the betrayal, the silence that lasted until Carson's dying day, and why Joan Rivers was never allowed back on The Tonight Show after one fateful phone call she never made. To understand why Carson's ban on Joan Rivers hit the entertainment world like a thunderclap, you first have to understand what their relationship actually meant, both professionally and personally. Joan Rivers was not an overnight success. In the early 1960s, she was grinding it out in small Greenwich Village comedy clubs, doing sets for nearly empty rooms, refining the razor-sharp, self-deprecating humor that would eventually make her a legend. She was aggressive, she was fearless, and she was funny in a way that made audiences uncomfortable in the best possible way. But the comedy world of that era was brutally hostile to women. Female comedians weren't supposed to be edgy. They weren't supposed to be cutting. They were supposed to be charming and palatable, and Joan Rivers was neither. Then came Johnny Carson. Rivers made her first appearance on The Tonight Show in 1965, and the moment she sat down in that guest chair, something electric happened. Carson laughed, genuinely, not the polite chuckle he reserved for guests who weren't quite landing. He leaned forward. He engaged. When she finished her set, he looked directly into the camera and said words that would define her career. "God, you're funny. You're going to be a star." In the world of 1960s television, those words from Johnny Carson weren't just a compliment. They were a coronation. Almost immediately, Rivers began receiving bookings she had never been able to land before. Her profile exploded. She appeared on The Tonight Show again and again over the following years, more than 100 times in total, and each appearance felt like a homecoming. Carson would bring her on not just to perform but to sit and talk, to trade barbs, to be genuinely funny together in the loose, spontaneous way that only people who truly trust each other can manage. By the 1970s and into the 1980s, Rivers had become one of the most recognizable comedians in America. She was selling out concert venues. She was releasing comedy albums. She was a regular on the talk show circuit. And through all of it, The Tonight Show remained her home base, the place where her career had been born and where it continued to be nurtured. When Carson reduced his hosting schedule in the early 1980s, cutting back to 4 nights a week and eventually 3, NBC needed someone reliable to step in on the nights he was absent. They needed someone the audience already loved, someone who had Tonight Show DNA in their bones. They chose Joan Rivers as his permanent guest host. It was an extraordinary honor, and Rivers embraced it completely. She was good at it. Audiences responded. For 3 years, from 1983 to 1986, Joan Rivers was the second face of The Tonight Show, the trusted substitute for the king himself. What nobody fully appreciated at the time was just how dangerous that position would turn out to be. By 1986, the television landscape was beginning to shift. Fox Broadcasting, the fledgling upstart network that Rupert Murdoch was aggressively building from the ground up, was looking for programming that could challenge the established networks. They wanted something bold, something that could plant a flag in late-night television, a territory that NBC had owned almost completely thanks to Carson. And Fox wanted Joan Rivers to be the one to plant it. The offer was remarkable. Fox presented Rivers with the chance to host her own late-night talk show, The Late Show starring Joan Rivers, which would air opposite The Tonight Show in direct competition. For Rivers, it was the kind of opportunity that comedians dream about. Her own show, her own desk, her own stage. After years of being the brilliant support act, she would finally be the headliner every single night. She said yes. The problem, the catastrophic, career-altering problem, was how she said yes. Joan Rivers accepted the Fox deal without telling Johnny Carson first. She didn't call him. She didn't send a message through a mutual contact. She didn't drop a hint that something was in the works. Carson found out the way everyone else in Hollywood found out, through the press, when the announcement was made publicly. He read it like a stranger. He heard about it like a civilian. And for a man who valued loyalty above almost everything else, who had invested years of his credibility and his platform into building Joan Rivers into the star she had become, the silence was unforgivable. Those who knew Carson well have said that he wasn't simply angry, he was wounded. And wounded people, particularly proud, private, complicated people like Carson, don't tend to express their hurt openly. They close doors. They go quiet. They cut ties with a clean, cold precision that leaves no room for negotiation. That is exactly what Carson did. Within days of the announcement, the message was delivered through NBC channels. Joan Rivers was no longer welcome on The Tonight Show. Not as a guest. Not as a host. Not in any capacity. The ban was total and immediate. And Carson made it known through industry channels that any performer or comedian who chose to appear on Rivers' new Fox show would similarly find themselves unwelcome on his stage. It was a declaration of war, Hollywood style, bloodless on the surface but brutal in its consequences. The Late Show starring Joan Rivers debuted in October 1986 with enormous publicity and high expectations. But almost immediately, the strain began to show. The show struggled in the ratings. The production was chaotic. Fox, still learning how to run a major television operation, couldn't provide the infrastructure that a nightly live talk show demanded. Behind the scenes, tensions between Rivers and her executive producer and husband Edgar Rosenberg were reportedly severe. And all the while, Carson's Tonight Show hummed along on NBC, untouchable and dominant, a reminder every single night of what Rivers had left behind. The Late Show was cancelled after less than a year. It was a brutal public failure, and the entertainment press covered its collapse in forensic detail. For Rivers, the professional humiliation was compounded by something far more personal: the estrangement from Carson. She had lost the show she had risked everything for, and she had also lost the mentor who had shaped her entire career. Tragically, the personal losses did not stop there. In August 1987, Edgar Rosenberg, facing severe depression and the professional fallout of the cancelled show's failure, took his own life in a Philadelphia hotel room. Rivers was devastated in a way that went beyond ordinary grief. She had not only lost her husband, she had lost her closest professional partner and the person who had encouraged her to take the Fox deal in the first place. She was, by almost every measure, at the lowest point of her life. In the years that followed, Joan Rivers rebuilt her career with extraordinary tenacity. She found new platforms, new audiences, new ways to be funny and relevant. She worked relentlessly: stand-up tours, television appearances on other networks, the hugely successful QVC jewelry business that made her genuinely wealthy on her own terms, and eventually the long-running E! Network series Fashion Police, which introduced her to an entirely new generation of fans. But the Tonight Show door remained closed. Carson retired from The Tonight Show on May 22, 1992, handing the desk to Jay Leno after 30 years. Even then, Rivers reached out, hoping that the end of his television career might soften the wall between them. It did not. Carson retreated into a private life in Malibu with his fourth wife Alexis Mass, largely withdrawing from public life entirely. He gave almost no interviews. He attended almost no events. He was famously, resolutely private. Rivers later said publicly that she tried repeatedly to reconnect with Carson over the years. She wrote letters. She made calls through mutual friends. She expressed, again and again, that she was sorry, not necessarily for taking the Fox deal, but for the way she had handled it, for the silence that had preceded the announcement, for failing to show him the personal respect that their years of friendship had earned. Carson never responded. Not once. Not a single word, in any form, ever came back. He died on January 23, 2005, from respiratory failure at his home in Malibu. He was 79 years old. And the silence between him and Joan Rivers, which had begun with an unannounced career decision in 1986, lasted every single day until that moment. Rivers spoke about it publicly with a frankness that was both heartbreaking and entirely characteristic of who she was. She said that losing Carson's friendship hurt her more than the cancellation of the Fox show, more than the terrible press, more than the professional chaos that followed. He had believed in her when almost nobody else did. He had said on national television that she was going to be a star. And then he had erased her from his life as completely as if she had never existed. It would be tempting to reduce the Carson-Rivers feud to a simple story about a powerful man and his wounded pride. But the reality was considerably more layered than that. Carson's Tonight Show was not merely a television program. By the mid-1980s, it had been the dominant force in American late-night television for more than 2 decades. It was a platform that launched careers, authenticated talent, and set the cultural conversation. When Carson endorsed you, when he laughed at your jokes and invited you to sit in the chair beside his desk, it meant something that no other television appearance could replicate. The Tonight Show under Carson was, in a real sense, the final word on whether you were funny enough, talented enough, and trustworthy enough to be welcomed into the living rooms of Middle America. To be banned from that platform was not simply to lose a booking. It was to be told, in the most public and permanent way possible, that you had been judged and found wanting by the man who set the standard. In the entertainment industry of the 1970s and 1980s, Carson's disapproval carried a weight that is difficult to fully appreciate today, when the landscape is so fragmented and so many different platforms exist. There was, in that era, essentially one Tonight Show. There was one Carson. And when he decided you were out, the industry felt it. Rivers felt it acutely. Despite everything she achieved after 1986, she was never able to return to the show that had launched her. The ban outlasted Carson's tenure, surviving through Jay Leno's years as host. Leno, who had his own complicated relationship with the Tonight Show succession, was not inclined to challenge the legacy decision. The ban became part of Tonight Show institutional memory, a cautionary tale told in green rooms and comedy clubs about the cost of breaking faith with the man who made you.